The radical left has taken over the Democratic Party.
Hello and welcome to Think Progressively, covering politics and all the other chaos life has to offer. This is episode 98, recorded on Friday, August 11th from Milwaukee. I'm Joe.
And I'm Jason.
And on today's episode, we discuss how Wisconsin takes advantage and traps undocumented workers. But first, the headlines.
Up yours, woke moralists. We'll see who cancels who.
Well, another episode and another Trump indictment, Joe. This is from last week. Obviously, we did not have an episode last week.
We're a little busy. I'm sorry, you guys.
Yeah, it's summer.
We don't make enough money, aka zero, from this podcast, so deal with it.
But we had the indictment stemming from the January 6th investigation.
Correct.
Headed up by Jack Smith.
Today, an indictment was unsealed, charging Donald J. Trump with felony violations of our national security laws, as well as participating in a conspiracy to obstruct justice. This indictment was voted by a grand jury of citizens in the Southern District of Florida, and I invite everyone to read it in full to understand the scope and the gravity of the crimes charged.
I feel like Jack Smith is like that character. Like, do you know how like in every like long time running show, and in the last season they bring on a random character in the last season to kind of try to wrap it up and end the whole thing, like either like to kill the main character, whatever it is. I'm thinking like the biker gang, like in Breaking Bad and stuff like that.
Right.
I feel like Jack Smith is that final character of the final season, where it's like he's just been brought in at the end just to take off Trump to like end the saga once and for all. I'm getting that vibe from him.
Well, let's hope so. And according to the indictment handed up last Tuesday by a federal grand jury, Trump faces 4 additional charges: conspiracy to defraud the United States, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, obviously that would be the counting and certification of the electoral votes, obstruction of and attempt to obstruct an official proceeding.
Sounds similar to the second one.
Right,
okay.
It sounds like exactly the same thing. And conspiracy against rights. And that would be against all of our right to vote, because he wanted to throw out all of our votes, including specifically ours here in Wisconsin, to make him the president once again.
Well, and specifically, they go out of their way to, one, do like a whole civics lesson in this indictment. It's like a 45-page long indictment. I highly recommend reading it because it's very enlightening. Jack Smith does a great job at painting a picture of what's happening. And I mean, he has a lot to work with since like the whole January 6th committee anyway, so there's also a lot of good stuff from that too. But they go out of the way to make sure that this is not just about the January 6th riot. They're not trying to, and we'll get into like the arguments against, but like Jack Smith specifically says, we are not trying to say like he can't lie as a presidential candidate. He can do whatever he wants. But the idea was that he did all of this and orchestrated an intentional coup to obstruct an official proceeding, which was the ballot counting during Congress. Am I correct with that?
That is, it's not, what it says in the indictment is it's not about his speech, the things that he said repeatedly around the election. It was about the actions that he took. So that is, I think, the biggest takeaway in this is it's, because that's the defense, right? Like you said, we'll get to what the defense is. The defense is, we don't have a freedom of speech anymore. We can't say when we think an election was stolen.
Right.
And it's not about that. It's about physically what he did to try to stop the certification of the votes and to force officials in like 6 states, I believe it was, including Wisconsin.
Correct.
To overturn their election results, which is actually illegal and is not just your freedom of speech.
And I'd also recommend looking up the video from Legal Eagle if you guys haven't ever checked out that channel. It's a really good legal breakdown of what happens in politics. And he actually talked about what happened with this whole indictment as well. And he brought up like a Twitter thread about how the free speech argument is really stupid from an NYU professor. And that professor talked about how you can do what you want in politics, but you can't, those words mean nothing if it's just in a vacuum, right? That's the whole idea of free speech is. We can say what we want here because we don't do anything with that speech. However, if you are actually using that speech to help orchestrate a crime, that's a problem. And that's the issue. Like, so for example, if you go in and just try to buy what was like a ski mask and a duffel bag and a crowbar, no one's going to hurt you for that and think that you're doing anything wrong. But if you actively say, I'm buying these things to commit a burglary, then that is considered conspiracy to commit burglary. And that's exactly what's happening here as well.
And there are 6 unnamed co-conspirators, although we know who they all are due to the way that they are described in the indictment. That would be Rudy Giuliani, who we all know.
America's mayor, baby.
John Eastman, who is basically the person that came up with this concept of the independent state legislatures and the plan of how they were going to try to stop the certification of the votes and then have the state legislators in those states who were Republican controlled, including Wisconsin, try to change their electoral votes. Sidney Powell, aka the Kraken, crazy lawyer who even Trump has called crazy many times behind her back, which is why we know that it's her, because that's exactly how she's described in the indictment. Jeffrey Clark, who was a Department of Justice attorney. Trump tried to make him the attorney general after William Barr resigned, but literally like every DOJ employee threatened to resign if he did that because Jeffrey Clark was not qualified for that job and was going to be put there specifically to try to help Trump overturn the election, which is what we're going to find out in this trial.
Right.
Kenneth Cheesebro? I don't know how to pronounce that weird name.
Let's just call it Cheesebro because I'm sure he's an awful human being and he deserves to be called a Cheesebro.
Cheesebro. It was another attorney. And the 6th one that a lot of people weren't sure who it was, but the New York Times made a pretty good case. That is Boris Epstein, who is a Moscow-born... He's Russian, Joe. Moscow-born political consultant who was also a friend of Eric Trump and was a White House official. None of them were charged, but I would expect to see their names quite a bit as we go forward, because these are the people that were in on this conspiracy. These are the people that were trying to overthrow a fair election.
Right. And we talked about all these people when covering the January 6th hearings as well. Like, these people were brought up over and over again during that time too. And this is even more interesting because we're also expecting to have the 4th indictment next week in Georgia. Or as early as next week is what people are speculating as of right now. We don't know exactly when that's going to happen, so which is good. I'm glad to hear. But again, I can't, Jason, I don't know what timeline we're in where we have the leading Republican candidate facing 4 indictments.
Right.
I think it's, what is it, 7?
And it's actually
cases.
More because there's also
it's the civil stuff
E.
too.
Jean Carroll.
Yeah,
the
I think it's like 7 cases, like 78 criminal counts, still counting.
Yeah, it is a one-man crime wave.
Man, this is crazy. Now let's move back to Wisconsin and still talk about the fraudulent election scheme. Well, we had now officially received word from Governor Tony Evers where he's now calling for legal consequences of the fake electors in Wisconsin.
Must be a listener to the show, because I called on everybody to do that on that episode. I said I wrote an email to Josh Call, and I hope all of our listeners do the same. Apparently, our governor is one of our listeners, and now he's following through on my suggestion.
Thank you, Governor Evers. We appreciate your support and patronage. But now what concerns me a little bit is, I'll now include the article as well, is that Call is still not commenting on whether he'll do anything. It looks like he's trying to say he's going to do something without actually saying anything. And I think it's because of all the federal investigations that are still going on.
That's not stopping
the others, though.
Yeah, the district attorney.
Which is what concerns
Michigan
me.
and Arizona.
So I don't know what Call is really waiting for at this point. You got the official go-ahead. You're already looking into it. Go ahead and announce it. These people need to be shown that they are having consequences. Do it. And also, I just threw this in here as well, but ProPublica did a very good, we had a couple of ProPublicas. Like, they're on a roll.
We are ProPublica simps.
Apparently we are right now, but they did a whole exclusive article about a GOP Wisconsin election official. Now, we talked about the WEC, the Wisconsin
Elections Commission.
Thank you. I almost forgot what it was. Before, when we were talking about when they were targeting the chair of the Wisconsin Elections Commission, election. One of the two Republicans were actually out of their mind and trying to help with the fake elector scheme. And now we have another one where there was a GOP member of the Wisconsin Elections Commission, but she's not going along with it. And now she's being ousted by the Republican Party and targeted by the Republican Party for not
including
going along with
getting
their scheme.
threatening phone calls.
Yeah, it's in like they're straight up like bullying and harassing this woman.
And this is a lifelong Republican voter.
Yes.
Always supported the Republican Party, just doesn't think that the election was rigged. And she would know, as she is one of the members of the Wisconsin Election Commission. I think she's, 72 years old, too?
Yeah, I believe so. 70.
Okay, 70 years old. So they're bullying grandma and basically threatening her life over the fact that Donald Trump lied about the election being stolen from him. And it's a lie. It does not have any basis in fact or reality. And people are so worked up over it that they're threatening an elderly woman. Someone who is in their political party, on their side politically. But she just doesn't believe the lie. And she is on the Wisconsin Election Commission, and they will not accept their word that the election was fair. And the results of that election were that, one, especially here in Wisconsin, Republicans won a bunch of offices.
Yes, many state Republicans all won their elections.
But Joe Biden beat Donald Trump for the presidency. That's the reality. No one stuffed the ballot box, but then forgot to check all the other ones for Democrats. You know what? It'll only look reasonable if we let Republicans win all of these other state and local elections. We'll just change the president, and that'll be it. That's not what happened.
Man, I mean, Democrats are really stupid. We're not that stupid. Gonna be honest, you guys.
We can only steal the presidential election. We can't do anything about the District 5 representative. There's nothing we can do about that. But the presidency, that one we're able to change.
And turning over into good news, if you guys haven't heard, Ohio just had a special election last Tuesday. Did you know about this, Jason?
I did.
Good. You're a good informed citizen then.
And this was because of a proposed amendment to enshrine abortion rights in the Ohio State Constitution that's going to be coming up in November.
Yep.
And it just passed another challenge in the Ohio Supreme Court that they were trying to throw out the amendment that had passed previously to put this on the ballot in November. So everything is now cleared. It will be there in November. Ohio will be the only state that is voting on abortion rights this year. But because they were so scared of the potential of having that amendment on the ballot in November,
via referendum,
binding referendum, unlike what we have here in the state of Wisconsin, Republicans were attempting to increase the threshold for a constitutional amendment from a simple majority, 51% of the vote, which it has been since 1912 in the state of Ohio, and instead...
This just seems like a good time to do it. You know, I mean, there wasn't really a reason why. It just, this was a good time.
And instead increase that threshold to 60%. Proponents to that change have argued for months that issue 1 was not about abortion, and that included Republican Secretary of State Frank LaRose, who first proposed the idea. Instead, they argued that it was intended to block outside influence in the form of rich, high-moneyed interest from out of town spending large sums of money to change laws in Ohio. That was the reason why they had to change the law in Ohio.
Right now. And also keep in mind, too, the Republicans who pushed this thing, they also didn't want to have the special election because the idea of having a random election in the middle of August for this thing is nonsensical. So they had it already on the calendar, not necessarily for this particular issue 1, that's what it was called, but they were planning on just canceling this election because there was nothing to have. The only reason why they kept this August election even on the books for this year was because they were concerned about the abortion amendment in November. So they already argued saying that it was useless to have this thing until they found a use to push back abortion rights even further.
And it turns out the people pushing to have this issue 1 to keep Ohio safe from out-of-town money was mainly out-of-town billionaire Dick Uihlein, who lives in Illinois and Wisconsin. Their corporate headquarters are in Wisconsin. He is actually an heir to the Schlitz fortune, which was a Wisconsin brewery. And he had paid something like $40 million of the $42 million spent to push. And that's through not only his, you'll see some different reporting on that number, but personally, I think he spent $5 million. The rest of the money actually came from PACs that he runs.
Yep.
So it was almost 100% funded by Dick, who is somebody that, if you're in Wisconsin, you should know well. He basically paid for Ron Johnson's campaign.
Yep.
He pays for a lot of Republicans in Wisconsin. He was a huge Trump guy, although now they've switched their support to DeSantis. That's him and his wife.
That probably won't last too long.
Right, which obviously once DeSantis is gone shortly, they'll probably switch back.
Right.
But it's just funny that, we need to protect Ohio from all of these big money out-of-towners. Kind of gives away the lie when you have your main donor being an out-of-town billionaire. Also giving away the lie was Frank LaRose himself during a Lincoln Day dinner in May, despite having said for months and months that issue 1 was not about abortion. He said something completely different to his supporters.
We have an opportunity to raise the threshold to 60%. And some people say this is all about abortion. Well, you know what? I'm pro-life. I think many of you are as well, right? And this is 100% about keeping a radical pro-abortion amendment out of our Constitution. The left wants to jam it in there this coming November.
Oh, actually, it's 100% about abortion. I will be fair to him and point out that in the next sentence, he also said that it was not just about abortion, but also about blocking a $15 an hour minimum wage, marijuana legalization, and gun control from the state of Ohio as well.
Well, and if
all things that are popular with a majority of people.
Well, and what's interesting is, so I did a lot of deep diving into like the advertising that was bought with all this money. And what a lot of people took away from it is that this is a procedural referendum, right? This is a procedural referendum that's all based on the idea of whether or not we should increase a threshold for referendums. However, you would never know that by the advertising, because all the advertising pushes either abortion for or against, or whatever random culture war issue that Republicans want to push for. And I remember that some like groups that were pushing for this referendum were talking about how they're going to have transgender people in school. They're going to take away your parental rights with these referendums. Californians and the ACLU are going to like come into your schools and put transgender people in your classrooms today. Like, it's insane stuff. Also, I just want to play this other ad that I think was hilarious. And this was against the referendum.
Do you have a condom?
Yeah. Sorry, you can't use those.
What are you talking about? Who are you?
I'm your Republican congressman. Now that we're in charge, we're banning birth control.
This is our decision, not yours. Get out of our bedroom.
I won the last election. I'm not going anywhere. I'm just gonna watch and make sure you don't do anything illegal.
Brilliant. And it's actually even funny because it's actually a TV ad too. It just shows two people about to get it on in a bedroom and just like a really creepy guy in a suit.
I got that impression even just with the audio.
It's great. It's so funny. So even with all the ads, you can clearly tell it's all about the culture wars and not even closely to what Republicans are trying to make it out to be.
So not only do they want to block the possibility of enshrining abortion rights into the Constitution, as Frank LaRose himself said, they want to block the adoption of a $15 an hour minimum wage. They want to be able to block the adoption of legal marijuana and gun control. Again, all things that are popular with a majority of people.
Correct.
That's what this was about completely. It was about taking away majority control from the state of Ohio.
Well, and literal democracy, too.
And just leaving, and these are all things that Republicans know they are not in the majority about, but they still want to be able to control. They don't care that most people want, if they're working 40-hour full-time jobs, they want to actually be able to make a living wage on that, which $15 an hour, honestly, I think we're past that even being
we're well past that now.
A living living wage, especially with what we just went through with the inflation and everything, all the profiteering that took place post-COVID, $15 an hour at this point is just common sense.
I mean, Jason, we were talking about $15 minimum wage 10 years ago.
Right. And the minimum wage has not changed in 20 years.
No.
There was a joke that was going around that was literally, in the last 30 years, we've had more Willy Wonka movies than we've had increases to the minimum wage in this country.
Oh, I don't like that at all.
And it's true.
I don't like either the more Willy Wonka movies nor the lack of increases of minimum wage.
Right. So fortunately, issue 1 did not pass. It failed 57% to 43%, which is almost exactly the numbers from people that support abortion.
Yep.
It's generally considered to be about 58%. That was the number specifically that the Republicans were using when they came up with the 60% threshold.
Yep.
Because they knew that we were around 58% nationwide, and that's why they had to be over that. So luckily, people did go out to vote. This was one of the highest vote totals for a special election. It was the only thing that was on the ballot.
Right.
And it got about the same numbers that like statewide gubernatorial races usually get.
Well, and that's the crazy thing. This is a random election with nothing else on the ballot in the middle of August. And it got over 3 million people voting in it.
And as you talked about previously too, what do we have going on right in the middle of August? All the college kids.
Oh, I think I say we got State Fair over here.
All the college kids are away. Ohio obviously has some big colleges there that I'm sure having a special election in August, some of the hope was that you would have those college kids that would be harder for them to vote or are from out of state. They probably wouldn't take the time to vote absentee, things like that. But unfortunately for the Republicans, and fortunately for everyone, and really something that Democrats need to keep in mind is that people will vote when it comes to abortion rights.
Yep.
It is an issue that you can actually mobilize people on, and they should just keep running on that. I hope that doesn't incentivize them to not actually do anything about it, but keep running on that. Keep doing everything you can to get abortion rights back in this country because it's something that is important to a lot of people.
So, Jason, you're going to have to... We got another ProPublica.
Well, and it's yet another chapter in the Supreme Court corruption scandals that are been ongoing. It's another ProPublica. This whole episode is going to be filled with ProPublica articles.
They're great. They do good work.
Yeah, they keep us in business. But they are continuing, and this comes also, I believe, courtesy of the New York Times as well. But they have continued to uncover this vast history of Clarence Thomas accepting these extravagant gifts and trips and things from billionaires. And they have found at least 38 destination vacations, including a previously unreported voyage on a yacht around the Bahamas, 26 private jet flights, plus an additional 8 by helicopter, a dozen VIP passes to professional and college sporting events.
Oh, great.
2 stays at a luxury resort in Florida and Jamaica, and a standing invitation to a super exclusive golf club overlooking the Atlantic coast. Most of these were undisclosed, which is, according to a lot of legal experts, a violation of the law that was written specifically to prevent Supreme Court justices from having this much
doing literally this.
Influence from outside donors.
This is so bad.
So we know about Harlan Crow, and he is in here, and that's the only person that Clarence Thomas has ever reported on their disclosure forms of all of the names that you're going to hear who've been giving him all these trips and flights and cruises and luxury boxes at football games and flights around the world. All of this that's here. We also have David Sokol, who is a former top executive at Berkshire Hathaway. And also this year, when he was giving a speech to the scholarship recipients, he predicted quote unquote, that the Supreme Court would throw out the Biden student loan forgiveness plan. Almost like he knew something.
You.
Somehow he had some inside knowledge.
This is infuriating, man.
You also have Wayne Huizenga, the former owner of the Miami Dolphins and Florida Panthers. Currently, he is rotting in a grave. I believe he died in 2018. So it was one good thing he's done.
I included a nice picture for you.
Oh, I know what he looks like.
Look at that guy. Jesus.
And I'm assuming that was before he died. That picture was taken.
How would you know?
Not currently. Yeah, it's kind of probably looks the same either way. And a lot of these trips were to Dolphins and Florida Panthers games. A lot of trips to the Nebraska college football. Clarence Thomas seemed to be a huge fan of them. And the final billionaire in this list, Tony Novelli, who was an oil baron. And what ties all of these people together is they are all members of the Horatio Alger Association.
Okay, and what's that?
And that's who the speech in front of the scholarship recipients, those were all Horatio Alger scholarship recipients. It is an exclusive nonprofit organization named after a 19th century novelist who popularized rags to riches folklore. I wonder what tracks these guys.
Ew.
And basically holds events for super rich weirdos. And actually, Horatio Alger was a minister on Cape Cod who resigned from his parish after he was credibly accused of molesting boys. So that's who you want to name your organization after. I'm sure if all of these people in power are secretly child molesters, if they weren't right-wing, this would be a big thing that they'd be glomming onto, is that this super elite organization is named after a child molester. But they're right-wing, so it's not part of that conspiracy. And the foundation has even used the Supreme Court building for some of their events.
That's weird.
Yay.
That's really weird. I don't like any of that.
So it just, again, continues to go to show how corrupt
impartial umpires calling balls and strikes
the Supreme Court of the United States is. And at this point, I think it's very obvious that Clarence Thomas needs to be impeached.
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, because, Jason, at this point, if this isn't impeachment worthy, what the hell is anymore? The whole point of impeachment is to get corrupt people out of our freaking system. So what are we doing?
M&Ms will not be satisfied until every last cartoon character is deeply unappealing and totally androgynous. Until the moment you wouldn't want to have a drink with any one of them. That's the goal. When you're totally turned off, they've won.
Boy ain't right.
We're foxed in the head this week. I'll let you take this one. I don't know a whole lot about this. I don't really pay much attention to the soccer world.
Let's talk about it. So the Women's World Cup is happening right now, as many of you guys probably know. And unfortunately,
some of you may not know that.
Well, get to know it or something. Come on, there's a whole world out there, you guys. Come on. And for those who are soccer fans, you may have seen that the U.S. women's team unfortunately made it to the round of 16 and then promptly lost to Sweden in a very tight game. They relied on penalty kicks at the end.
Oh, so you're telling me a soccer match ended in a tie?
Well, they went into overtime.
Well, how many goals were scored in regulation?
I think it was 0.
I wonder why I don't watch soccer.
It's fun, all right? It's a lot of fun. You should watch it. It's fun.
Yeah, sounds great.
It is great. We'll talk about it later. Now, the America First MAGA crowd of conservatives.
They're huge patriots. They were rooting for the U.S., right?
You would think so, except they're cheering the fact that the United States women's national team has indeed lost. And they're so happy that we lost.
Well, because they like to root for the underdog, and the women's national team had won 2 World Cups in a row. They're kind of the juggernaut, and they're just like, we got to root for the little guy, right?
Oh, of course not. It's because the team is woke. And none other than reformed Fox News anchor Megyn Kelly, who's perfectly on the good side of things now, completely lost it, had a huge meltdown about the women's soccer team. Take a listen.
I couldn't care less about the loss. Couldn't care less. I hope that they took a lesson from losing that we all want our kids to learn when things go down, which is be introspective, figure out how it happened. And in this case, they didn't have their eye on the ball. They had their eye on their woke activism. There is not a one who is actually singing and who looks proud to be there. Not one. Not one. So get off.
Then you aren't that excited to represent
Then
the
don't
United
play for America. Then don't. Don't play for America. Go find another team. Good. Get out. I'm thrilled they lost. Good. I'm glad you went down. You don't support America. I don't support you.
So real patriotic stuff.
I don't like you, so you should go find another team. Not, I should just root for you, or I should leave.
Well, I love the fact that, I mean, we've heard this sentiment before. The whole, like, if you don't like this country, then get out, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I love that Megan tried to put that in a praying for a country's team context, where it was like, hey, if you don't like it, then go play for another team.
Yeah, which you can't.
Which you
in
can't.
A
That's not the point.
context,
And it's like, well, no, just get out of the country. And for the record, like, that's not including all the crazy things that her guest also said that you probably heard a little bit in those clips, where they're talking about how ungrateful they were, how they hate Megan Rapinoe so much because she's this woke, blue-haired, outspoken feminist who demanded equal pay for the things that she's doing.
Which is the only thing that I know about the U.S. women's national team. I know that they won World Cups previously, and I know that they wanted to be paid equally like the men's team, who always loses early on or doesn't even qualify for the World Cup tournaments, and they're winning. And people know I know more about the women's national team than I do the men's team.
But that's the whole freaking point, though, Jason, is that you don't get this amount of outrage when the men's team loses. You don't have the absolute vitriol for the women's team than you do for the men's team. And I'm wondering why. I've said it before, time and time again. If you want to see sexism in America, look at how women's sports in any facet is treated in this country. If they do one thing wrong, they are immediately crucified for it. And they're blasted on social media for it. You have people like Megyn Kelly ranting about it on her show, for God's sakes. But then no one even cares about the men's team. I mean, and Jason, the only thing I can even think about that their woke agenda even is that they're also super pro LGBTQ. Like, that's it, man.
Right. Well, I mean, statistically speaking, like a lot of women's sports still to this day, you have a lot of openly gay athletes, whereas in men's sport, it's still very closeted.
Right, because of toxic masculinity bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
And it just drives me nuts when you have these people who do not care at all about women's sports, then for some reason find a huge interest in women's sports when it comes to transgender people and when it comes to bashing the literal female athletes they're trying to supposedly protect. And of course, we got something from the former president Donald Trump about this. Do you want to do the voice?
I don't know. I got some negative commentary on my Trump voice, but I'll try it.
I
anyway.
like the Trump voice.
We have, of course, from Truth Social, that weird, lumpy, flag-imposed
It's
Donald
such a
Trump
weird picture,
face.
man. It's such a weird picture.
The shocking and totally unexpected loss by the U.S. women's soccer team to Sweden is fully emblematic of what's happening to our once great nation under crooked Joe Biden. Many of our players were openly hostile to America.
Hostile to America!
No other country behaved in such a manner, or even close. Woke equals failure. Nice shot, Megan. The USA is going to hell. MAGA. Isn't he openly
for reference, when he's
hostile to America by saying the USA is going to hell?
Right.
Isn't that literally what he's saying that they said?
And for reference, by the way, Jason, because I know you don't know this, Megan Rapinoe missed her shot in the penalty kicks.
Right. I actually do know that.
Okay.
But yes, soccer players miss sometimes, even Hall of Fame players.
Well, and again, you have all these people who are clutching their pearls. God forbid, again, these people are walking contradictions. God forbid we have the freedom to critique our own government because that's the greatest thing in the entire world. But when you do, how dare you?
But yet, he'll do it over and over again.
You're hostile to America.
He's literally saying, though, what's happened to, like, the women's soccer team losing is emblematic of how Joe Biden is destroying our country. our country is going to hell. And then how dare these women criticize our great country?
Yeah. It's so stupid. Oh, and there is a very non-zero chance he could be our president again.
Probably from prison.
Ah!
That was really a productive segment, wasn't it? It's hard to get any word in with this clown.
So for our main segment, we want to talk about 2 ProPublica articles that we are reading. Yes, we are Sims for ProPublica, deal with it. And they're specifically on Wisconsin dairy farms and how they utilize undocumented workers.
And I do think it is certainly symptomatic of the larger immigration picture.
Right. But I think this was like a good way of showing what's happening in local communities that are thriving because of undocumented workers, or undocumented labor at least. But the big issue with this article is Wisconsin, like many other states, do not allow undocumented workers to get driver's licenses, creating a literal pit and a spiral for undocumented immigrants who are already here to live worse lives and constantly pay fines and fees and live in fear all day long.
I believe there are 31 states, including Wisconsin, that do not allow undocumented immigrants to have driver's licenses.
That is correct. And we'll get into those in a little bit too. So what were your first thoughts when you read these articles?
It's not a surprise to me. And we had previously talked about doing a show on immigration.
Yeah, because
like quite a long time ago.
That's a super narrow, easy topic to cover.
Right.
For 2 white guys from Wisconsin to cover.
And we never really got to it, but it's something that I did do some research on. And this is like the point that they're making in this article, and Wisconsin being a microcosm for the larger picture, is always what I wanted to represent. That our economy is dependent on undocumented labor.
Yes.
And specifically undocumented labor, because the conditions are generally terrible, the pay is terrible. If they had the same rights and ability to work in other industries that the rest of us do, they wouldn't.
Correct.
That's why it's specifically dependent on this like illegal workforce that basically is forced to take the jobs in these industries. And Wisconsin's agricultural and dairy industry is one of those that is heavily dependent. And that's not just the farms, like the dairy farms. It's kind of the picture of Wisconsin. You know, our quarter had a cow.
We're the dairy state.
Wheel on it. We also have a lot of chicken and pork processing plants. The Green Bay Packers, they're named after Acme Packing. It's a meat packing company. That is a huge industry in Wisconsin.
Well, and I think that was something that really struck me a bit too, is just the amount of people who are working in these farms, right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing too, like these are not your atypical, I mean, some of these are definitely where, you know, they did say in the article that it's very difficult to actually determine how many exact workers are doing this because it's all based on fake paperwork and farmers don't really care. But they threw out the number 6,200 people or 6,200 people that worked on medium to large farms.
Right. I think they said the estimated total number was like 70,000.
Right. And because that also includes the other tons of people that work on smaller farms.
Mm-hmm.
And so these are not like the typical big corporations that we usually call out when we hear about these issues, right? When we talk about, well, why aren't we going after the business owners and the big corporations who are hiring and encouraging these people to work for them under the table?
They're not always under the table, though.
Well, that too.
The ones that are using these false documents, they're being charged tax, just like we would be.
Yep.
But yet they can't use any of these services.
Correct.
So they can't get food stamps, even though Republican talking heads, your Republican family members have probably been telling you your whole life that the only people on food stamps are illegal immigrants.
Right.
It's not true. They can't get that benefit. They can't get Medicaid. They can't get Social Security because they don't have a Social Security number. But yet they pay into all of those institutions. And honestly, all of those institutions are dependent on that money that they don't have to supply those services to.
Right. But the point that I'm making is this isn't your atypical like corporation that's taking advantage, right? These are the literal small town farms that conservatives and Republicans, and I mean us too, like I'm not going to deny it either, but like we're praising these people all the time. And when you have conservatives and Republicans who are praising these farms and farmers, when they also know that these farmers are using undocumented labor, is a huge hypocrisy for me.
Mm-hmm.
And that drives me nuts.
Trump said in a speech that the first thing he would would do day one, hour one of being reelected is kick out every illegal immigrant in the country. He's been known to employ migrant and immigrant workers at all of his properties and every business he owns.
Yes.
It's just this huge hypocrisy of talking a big game about this and that really hoping nothing changes because, one, nobody wants them kicked out because our entire economy would collapse.
Yep.
And two, business owners don't want a path to citizenship because, like I said, they would actually have to pay them fair wages. They wouldn't want to work in these horrible conditions for bad wages. They're not going to report anything to OSHA because they're going to get kicked out anyway. So it's really a scenario where what is best for the economy, not for the actual people involved, but for the American economy, is if nothing actually changes.
Well, and so let's talk about some of the consequences of not allowing undocumented workers to have driver's licenses. Because I bet for a lot of people, I'm not trying to say you're stupid for having this reaction, but I bet a lot of people have the idea like, well, hang on, why should they even be allowed to have a driver's license?
And they have been for years and years and years in Wisconsin
as well.
Yeah, it's something that just changed recently due to the Real ID laws.
Right.
I think it was 2006.
That's correct. So, okay, let's go into that really quick then. Technically speaking, it was in 2005 where the federal Congress passed the Real ID Act. And this was actually like a super rushed measure that was post 9/11, and people were kind of losing their minds because they thought all these people were going to get driver's licenses when they're supposed to, and all these terrorists were going to get these driver's licenses, and you never know what they're going to do with these driver's licenses. And it required states to check immigration status before they issued driver's licenses or state IDs. And then in response to this, in 2006, Wisconsin passed a law barring undocumented immigrants from receiving driver's licenses. So
when they could have just been, okay, they don't get the Real ID.
Correct.
IDs, but they would just get
And there are states that do that. And now they're going back to doing that again. Well, I think what's crazy is, so why is it bad for them not to have it? I mean, number one, obviously it's already unethical. We can talk about the unethical part where you have people who are already here. They have to drive to get to work. We live in a society where you have to drive a car to get anywhere. And this goes doubly for where these people live because they're in rural areas. I think there was a quote in one of the articles where they're talking about how like the nearest grocery store was like 25 miles away.
Mm-hmm.
You have to drive.
Right. We have no public transportation.
Right. Especially in those areas.
Right. Well, outside of the cities, even in the cities, there's hardly any, but outside of the cities, there's none.
Right.
There's no public transportation where I am, and I'm just a little west of Milwaukee.
So you have people who are trying to live good lives here. You have people who are trying to make sure that they are providing for their own families. And again, like Jason's been saying, propping up our economy in Wisconsin.
Right. The economy would collapse overnight.
So you have these people who are basically stuck in a situation where they have to constantly break the law just to work and survive here. Literally, that's what you have to do. Number two is that it makes our roads much more dangerous because since these people did not get driver's licenses, they are not fully informed on all our driving laws, which makes our roads much more dangerous for everyone involved in those situations. And to make it even worse, obviously, those people are not insured.
Right.
And there's like a whole other thing with like the whole ethical part as well, where we do allow in the state you have to register your car, and you're allowed to register your car as an undocumented immigrant without a driver's license, but then you just can't drive it.
And the money for vehicle registration is supposed to go to upkeep of the roads that you're using.
Right.
So they're not allowed to use the roads.
It's insane.
But they'll still take their money for registering a vehicle. And they even point out that a way around this, because a lot of times what happens is the police randomly, quote unquote, wink wink, run their license plates, and they find out that the vehicle is registered to someone who does not have a driver's license, and then they pull them over.
Well, I feel like from the articles, that's where a lot of these come from. I mean, I know there was a lot of talk about how, what was like 60 to like 70% of all driving without a license were all Hispanic drivers or something like that.
Right. And they said, the documentation's sometimes difficult. They don't differentiate between
race,
white and Hispanic, or they don't keep any race information at all. It's when they started looking at last names, it was like 85%.
Right.
Traditionally Hispanic last names.
Right.
So one of the tricks that they said in the article to get around these, like being pulled over, because they consider that cause to pull you over if the vehicle's registered to someone that does not have a license. So to get around that, they're basically paying people who will allow them to register their vehicle in their name, people that are citizens that, do have licenses. And those people are making money by just basically allowing an undocumented worker to register the vehicle in their name so that they don't get pulled over as frequently by the police. What they're saying in a lot of these small municipalities like Sparta and I think it was like Abbotsville
and Manitowoc and
is they get a lot of their money that's coming in to these circuit courts. A lot of these cases are specifically for driving without a license. So that's a lot of money coming in. And I think that kind of shows what the motivation behind these cops. Yeah, I'm sure there are some racist cops that specifically pull over people just to harass them because they know they don't have licenses and they think it's fun. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a racial motivation. It can just be purely to get the money.
But it's also to the county's detriment, though, because in the articles, they also go into very explicit detail about how the courts can't handle these.
Well, right, but then they just decriminalize it. They still write you a ticket and collect the money.
Right.
But they just don't make you go to court. It's like a parking ticket.
And it's so insane because you even have, in the article, I'll just read the quote here. In one county, officials have been quietly conducting a pilot driver's education program aimed largely at undocumented immigrants who were caught driving without a license. They are reluctant to speak publicly about it out of fear that any attention will lead to conservative backlash. So now we have like backroom driver's ed courses, for God's sakes, because of how bad this problem is. But we won't do anything about it.
Don't tell Fox News, though.
And you're 100% correct. Because let's be real here, Jason. When we're talking about Sparta and what was the other one? Ashwaubenon? It was an A one.
Abbotsville?
Yeah, Abbotsville. These are not diverse communities outside of these undocumented immigrants, right? So when you have people doing supposedly random, and I have a quote from the Buffalo County Sheriff in there, but basically he just said that we're impartial with our random searches and it helps us. You are not. And that is a complete lie. Even if he believes it, that's a complete lie. Because when you're in a predominantly white county where like 90% of you are all white and you see people who are usually of other colors and other races, your first idea is to then go check and say, hey, you're not from this county. Let's go randomly check this one area, which just endangers these immigrants even more.
One farmer in this article, one farmer said that literally the sheriff's deputies sat outside of his farm.
Yes.
And pulled people over as they came into work because they know what's going on. And like I said, they could just be horrible racists. And I would say like that particular instance, probably racism, but it doesn't have to be. It could just be people that are trying to meet quotas, people that know that this is a big income stream for the county, that they just want the money. It could just be greed. It doesn't have to be. The outcome's the same. They could just randomly pull over people, and most of the time it's just going to be a bit of an inconvenience. They run your license, they let you go, and you're just kind of like mad at probably your brother-in-law who's the sheriff or whatever.
Right.
But to someone who is an undocumented worker who is legally not able to get a license, you're going to end up with a $300 fine.
So try that in a small town. And should we talk about what's stopping this from happening?
Well, you just did, right? We can't tell the conservatives about this because they'll get mad. They'll think that we're soft on immigration. That's the reason.
Well, and I have some quotes here that I wanted to talk about as well. So in this article, we do have Representative Patrick Snyder, who is a Republican, and he said, I have some Republican voters and Republican colleagues that say, hey, they came here illegally. They didn't come here through legal channels, so they shouldn't be rewarded. And again, at the end of the day, it's this weird notion of, I don't want you here. And it's couched in this weird frame
your
of
life should be more difficult.
Right. And keep in mind, they're already here. Like, they have lives here now. It's not about, like, freaking, I hate that I have Jason all these lyrics in my head now. It's not like in that Try That in the Small Town song where he says, around here we take care of our own. No, you don't. You see people who are different from you and you don't know anything about them. You don't care that they contribute to society and they're doing things fairly in while they're here. You just don't like the fact that they are not originally from here and that you have this weird notion that illegal immigrants are awful things and people that should just be like scourged.
Not people.
Right, literally.
Like as we're seeing right now in Texas, where you you have giant buoys with razor wire and saw blades attached to them designed to kill immigrants trying to come to this country. Not dissuade them. Kill and drown them and maim them. That same attitude exists here in Wisconsin.
Oh, absolutely. And there's even like a lot of research about how states that have rural areas that are far away from the borders, so like we're not even close to the southern border, we have stronger attitudes about immigration.
Yeah, we're literally on the northern border.
Right. And we have stronger attitudes about immigration than people on the southern border have.
Because they might know some people from Mexico.
Yeah, literally. Another argument that people brought up in these articles was that they were sympathetic to doing it, but they're worried that the undocumented immigrants are going to be using their driver's licenses to vote illegally. We got more voter fraud. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you put this quote in here. This is the quote that most stood out to me as well. And it is a mayor of Abbotsford, Jim Wykes, who said, "We need these people to learn how to drive and our rules and regulations and everything," which right away he sounds like he's super smart. But he said he worries about voter fraud and wouldn't want undocumented immigrants to use those driver's licenses to vote illegally. I might have some news for Mayor Wykes that, we have this whole system set up. There are people that are here on visas and green cards and things like that that also can't vote.
Yep.
They can have driver's licenses.
Correct.
We kind of keep track of that in a system. It's called a database. You might not be familiar with it.
Let's call it an Excel spreadsheet.
We'll just say it's a place where we keep all of this information. And
just imagine where you thought Hillary Clinton's emails were on. That's what we have.
So yes, it's this stupidity and ignorance. Yeah, we could give them driver's licenses, but then they're going to use those driver's licenses to vote for Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden. And that's not how it works.
No.
We've had a system in place for like 100 years. Just because you have a driver's license does not mean that you can vote. You have to register to vote. You will not be able to vote if you are not a U.S. citizen, even though you have a driver's license.
And a place of residence.
I know that's not what Fox News and Newsmax and
any Republican
Ben Shapiro, it's not what they tell you. It's not what they've been hammering into your tiny little head for the past 50 years. But that's the truth.
Well, and okay, Jason, here's the thing. Even if that, because then they kind of go on in the article saying, well, we should do something separately to show that they can't vote or whatever it is,
Yeah, sure. Have a big red sticker.
But that's my thing. It's like, okay, so let's give them the benefit of the doubt and let's meet them halfway, right? Let's say, okay, fine. You have no idea about how our election system works. You're completely wrong and you're completely ignorant of what's going on. But fine, because you're scared and you're stupid, I'll meet you halfway.
And you've been lied to.
I'll meet you halfway and let's have a different type of driver's license for undocumented workers that shows very clearly to election officials this cannot be used to vote. Why is that not being done?
We'll have a donkey with a line and a circle.
I am positive Democrats would get behind this thing. And if it's that easy, because I know it's possible, and if it's that easy to do, and Republicans are already thinking about doing it, why are they not doing it? It's not because they can't. It's because they do not want to serve these people that they think are subhuman.
Right, they're coming over here, they're taking our jobs, they're using up all of our services, so we shouldn't do anything to benefit them. They're smuggling drugs. They're all drug dealers. They're probably full of fentanyl. Full of it.
Just full.
Cops can't even touch them. I'm surprised all these cops doing these traffic stops haven't died.
Well, okay, let's quote Donna Rosar, who's another state representative of this thing. So Representative Rosar said in the article, there are a lot of us that believe we're being invaded and that the federal government doesn't care. And I get the sense that some of my colleagues believe that if we start chipping away at this undocumented worker issue, we are taking some responsibility away from the federal government to do their job.
It's not me, but one of my friends.
Right. And this notion that you're here for the people and your constituents and that you're here to make your your communities safer and better, when your literal constituents are saying, we need to do this, not even for the undocumented immigrants, but for our farmers and for the constituents of our communities that are in danger on the roads because of this. You're worried that you're being invaded. And I think that's a very important word as well. Republicans have been using the term invasion and invaded for so long now to talk about immigration. And they use so many different ways to dehumanize people like this.
And that's how we end up with literal death buoys at the southern border.
Well, and that's where I have a problem with people even using the term like illegal. But you have people, I remember Ron Johnson doing this all the time, and he's not the only one. Instead of even referring to illegal immigrants, they just call them illegals now.
Ron Johnson actually probably thinks that they're aliens.
I would not be surprised. Yeah. So that's what drives me nuts about this whole thing, is that Republicans have every reason. The farmers want it. The county officials want it. Hell, even some of the police want it, but they won't do it because they hate this group of people. So what can be done? Well, like we said before, while there were, was it 31?
31 states that don't.
Yeah. Well, there are 31 states, including Wisconsin, that don't do it. We do have 19 states, as well as the District of Columbia, passing laws. I think Minnesota was the most recent one, allowing undocumented workers to have driver's licenses. And I'll just quickly go through them in alphabetical order. California, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Hawaii, Illinois, Maryland, Massachusetts, Minnesota, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, Nevada, Oregon, Rhode Island, Utah, Vermont, Virginia, and Washington. And what have those states seen? From different reports, multiple states have saw about a 10% decline in hit and run incidents, making the roads much safer. They've also saw a massive decrease, up to like 60 to 80% in uninsured drivers. So shockingly, when undocumented immigrants are allowed to get driver's licenses legally, they also get insurance for the cars that they own, making all of the roads safer for everybody involved.
Yeah, like we said, they are paying registration.
Yes.
On these vehicles and getting nothing out of it. When given the opportunity, they are going to pay for these services and things that they need. It's just they literally are forced not to do that.
Correct. And also, like we've been talking about throughout this whole segment, numerous local counties and municipalities found tons of relief from processing so many cases of driving without a license. It's making their lives easier too. And just to let you know that things have been happening in Wisconsin, even though Republicans dismantled everything.
They've at least been attempted.
Right. Governor Tony Evers has included processes to allow undocumented immigrants in Wisconsin to obtain driver's licenses 3 times now in each budget. And of course, Republicans struck it down every single time.
And I guarantee I didn't look up the votes, but I bet even these representatives that we've got these quotes from in this article saying, oh yeah, I would support it. I bet they voted to veto it as well.
Oh, you know what? I don't know which, because it's technically on our joint finance committee. I know Rosar isn't on it, but maybe Jesse James is. He's a senator.
They had no comment from him for that article.
That would be interesting though. I'd like to see that. Also, there have been standalone bills every time because Republicans always reject the budget. And guess what? Republicans won't even allow those bills to get a public hearing, let alone a vote. Because if you guys didn't know how bad our state government works, basically any Democrat bill that gets introduced doesn't even get a hearing. There's no due process, there's no vote, and the people can't even voice their opinions on the matter. Republicans are like, you know what? We don't care. We have the votes to stop you. We have the power. Give you the middle finger. Screw off.
It's clearly not an important topic for Republicans, even though all of these counties that we're talking about that have these dairy farms, they are all very rural, all very Republican counties.
Well, and the article even talks about how these counties went super for Trump. And I mean, that's kind of what I have, Jason, but I just want to leave the listeners with one more thing. There's way more information about this as well, specifically from Wisconsin's perspective. If you would like more information on how to get involved with helping to advocate for driver's licenses for all, check out Voces de la Frontera. They have tons of information, ways to get involved both at the state capitol, ways to contact your representatives. It's a wealth of information. So we'll include a link for that in the show notes below as well.
And just know, again, immigrant work, and we talk a lot about what it means in Wisconsin, but even outside of those dairy farms and those processing plants, every restaurant you go to, who do you think's cooking the food? Who do you think's bussing the tables? It's all throughout the entire service industry, throughout the entire country.
Yep.
The United States economy would literally collapse. Who do you think was working all of those jobs still through COVID? Because they literally could not afford to stop working, and they weren't eligible for any of the minor, measly COVID relief checks that the rest of us got. our economy, you thought COVID was bad and all of the issues of the supply chain and everything like that. If every undocumented worker left the United States, a plan that a lot of Republicans support, mass deportations, every undocumented worker out of the country, our economy would collapse.
Quite literally.
So stop demonizing these people. Our country was built on undocumented work. What do you think all of those people that came over on all of those ships?
Those were good white
right.
White people.
It didn't matter because they were white. They weren't citizens either.
But they were white.
They came here to build a better life and for the fact that their children could become citizens and actually live the way they wanted them to. And that is the exact same thing that's happening with the undocumented workers coming from the South. They're not all fentanyl drug mules,
right?
like you'll see presented by Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio and Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump.
Well, we talked before, like a while ago, about that motto that was on, what is it? Is that the statue at Ellis Island?
Mm-hmm. Send me your poor, your tired, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free.
And Republicans even tout that. I think, didn't we say a couple of Republicans even shared that a couple of times? And it's like,
well, you even had
serious?
A Republican saying that they should take it off because they didn't feel that represented America.
Ugh. Like Jason said, don't play into this dehumanizing garbage. Understand what undocumented labor does for our state and for our country, and do the right thing and help us support driver's licenses for all.
And just as a little treat, we're going to put at the end of the outro,
since we're talking about driver's licenses.
Right. This kept popping in my head the whole time. It doesn't fit specifically what we're talking about, but it is an excerpt from the Libertarian Party presidential debate of 2016, where you had Libertarian candidates giving their opinion on whether or not anyone should have driver's licenses. And at the end of it, you will have the eventual Libertarian Party nominee, Gary Johnson, getting booed. So I'll leave that for you. You can listen to any libertarians out there. This is how ridiculous you all sound. Have fun.
Thank you for listening. We hope to see you in the next episode. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at ThinkProPod. You can email us at thinkpropod@gmail.com. And remember, when in doubt, think progressively.
Should someone have to have a government-issued license to drive a car?
Hell no.
What's next? Requiring a license to make toast in your own damn toaster?
The license to drive? You know, I'd like to see some competency exhibited by people before they drive.